They called it a floating coffin, a tiny wooden ship heading into the most violent oceans on Earth. And on board was a 22-year-old amateur named Charles Darwin. He was supposed to come back a pastor. Instead, he came back with a dangerous idea. How did a nice religious boy end up riding with cowboys, hunting monsters, and discovering a truth that would shatter religion? He had to survive hell to do it. This is the entire untold voyage of the HMS Beagle. Chapter 1. The Accidental Hero. Stop for a second. Close your eyes. When I say the name Charles Darwin, who do you see? You see an old man, right? You see a wizard with a long white beard, looking wise, holding a skull, probably sitting in a dusty library. You see a genius who always knew he was going to change the world. But that image is a lie. The Charles Darwin who actually changed history wasn't an old man. He was a kid, and he wasn't a genius. He was a failure. In fact, if you met Charles Darwin in 1831, you wouldn't think he was the father of evolution. You would think he was a rich, spoiled dropout who had no idea what to do with his life. And you would be right. To understand the most dangerous voyage in scientific history, we have to start with the fact that Charles Darwin was never supposed to be on that ship. In fact, he was never supposed to be a scientist at all. The story begins with a scream. Picture a cold operating theatre in Edinburgh, Scotland. It's the 1820s. There is no anesthesia. There are no painkillers. There is just whiskey and a wooden stick to bite down on. Young Charles is a medical student, standing in the back, watching a surgeon cut into a child. The blood is everywhere. The screaming is unbearable. Charles doesn't take notes. He doesn't step forward to help. He runs. He runs out of the room, sick to his stomach, vowing never to return. This is the father of science, a guy who couldn't handle the sight of blood. He drops out of medical school, and this triggers a family crisis. You see, Charles has a father, Robert Darwin, who is a massive, intimidating, wealthy doctor. And Robert is furious. He looks at his drifting, lazy son, and he delivers a line that has gone down in history. He tells Charles, "You care for nothing but shooting, dogs and rat-catching, and you will be a disgrace to yourself and all your family." Let that sink in. The man who would write The Origin of Species was told by his own father that he was nothing but a rat-catcher. A disgrace. So the family comes up with a plan B. If Charles is too squeamish to be a doctor and too lazy to be a lawyer, there is only one place left for a rich failure: the church. That's right. The plan is to send Charles to Cambridge to study theology. He is going to become a country parson. He is going to spend his life reading the Bible to farmers. And here is the supreme irony that you have to understand. At 22 years old, Charles Darwin is a creationist. He believes literally every single word of the Bible. He believes the world is 6,000 years old. He believes God created every animal exactly as it is today. He isn't looking for evolution. He is looking for a quiet life where he can collect beetles and praise the Lord. But history creates strange accidents. Just as Charles is preparing for his boring life in the church, a letter arrives. It's not a job offer, it's an invitation to a suicide mission. The British Navy is sending a ship the HMS Beagle, to map the bottom of the world, the jagged, freezing coast of South America. It is a dangerous, miserable job. But the captain of this ship, a man named Robert Fitzroy, has a problem. We need to talk about Captain Fitzroy. He is only 26 years old, but he is already one of the most brilliant sailors in the Empire. He is an aristocrat, a perfectionist, and a conservative religious zealot. But he is terrified of something darker. He is terrified of his own mind. You see, the captain of a British warship is the loneliest man on earth. He cannot eat with his sailors. He cannot speak to them as friends. He must maintain absolute, icy authority. And on a voyage that lasts 5 years, that silence can drive you mad. Fitzroy knows this better than anyone, because the previous captain of the Beagle, a man named Pringle Stokes, went into that same cabin, locked the door, and put a bullet in his head. The Beagle is a cursed ship. Fitzroy is terrified that if he goes alone, the Blue Devils, his name for depression, will get him too. He doesn't need a scientist. He needs a friend. He needs a gentleman companion, someone rich enough to pay his own way, and educated enough to make conversation at the dinner table. He needs a babysitter for his own sanity. So Charles Darwin is proposed for the job. Not because he's a great naturalist, he's barely an amateur, but because he is a gentleman. But even then, he almost doesn't make it. And the reason is absolutely ridiculous. It comes down to his face. When Darwin meets Captain Fitzroy for the interview, Fitzroy stares at him. He studies him. Fitzroy is a believer in physiognomy, the pseudoscience that says you can judge a man's character by the shape of his face. And Fitzroy hates Darwin's nose. He thinks the nose looks lazy. He thinks a man with a nose like that lacks energy and determination. He thinks a man with that face will give up when the waves get high and the food runs out. Charles Darwin, the greatest biologist in history, is almost rejected because his nose looks slightly too round. It is only by sheer luck and the influence of Charles's uncle that Fitzroy agrees to take him. But let's be clear about what this opportunity actually is. Darwin is walking away from his comfortable life, his family fortune, and his future in the church. He is stepping onto a ship that is nicknamed a floating coffin. The Beagle is tiny, only 90 feet long. It is a class of ship known for capsizing in storms. Darwin is stepping into a cabin where the previous occupant blew his brains out. He is signing up for 5 years of isolation with a manic-depressive captain who thinks Darwin's nose is a sign of weakness. Darwin writes a letter to his family. He tries to sound brave. He packs his bags. He packs his guns for shooting birds, he packs his beetle-catching nets, and, most importantly, he packs his Bible. He walks up the gangplank of the Beagle thinking he is going on a grand adventure to document the glory of God's creation. He thinks he will come back in a few years, become a priest, and live a normal life. He has absolutely no idea that he is about to see things that will shatter his faith, break his heart, and rewrite the history of the human race. The funny, lazy, rat-catching dropout is about to die, and the scientist is about to be born. But first, he has to survive the ocean. Chapter 2. The Floating Coffin. If you have a romantic image of sailing in your head, if you are picturing white sails against a blue sky, the salt spray on your face and the thrill of adventure, I need you to take that image and bury it. Because the reality of the HMS Beagle wasn't an adventure. It was a prison. Actually, it was worse than a prison. In the British Navy, the 10-gun brig was known by a very specific, very dark nickname. They were called coffin brigs, and there was a reason for that. They were designed to carry heavy cannons, but they were too small, too light, and completely unstable. In a heavy storm, these ships didn't just ride the waves. They filled with water and sank like stones. They were famous for capsizing. They were famous for killing everyone on board. And this is where our 22-year-old amateur Charles Darwin finds himself in December 1831. He isn't stepping onto a luxury liner. He is stepping into a wooden box that measures just 90 feet long. That is it. 90 feet to hold 74 men, supplies for 5 years, cannons, gunpowder and livestock. The claustrophobia is instant. Darwin is a tall man, over 6 feet, and he has to stoop just to walk below deck. His bedroom is the chart room, a tiny cupboard he shares with an assistant. He has to sleep in a hammock strung over the drafting table. He literally doesn't have room to turn around. On December 27th, the Beagle finally casts off from Plymouth. They head out into the grey, churning waters of the Atlantic, and almost immediately the adventure turns into a nightmare. The Beagle hits the winter swells, and the ship doesn't just roll, it lurches. It plunges into the troughs of the waves and shudders as if it's breaking apart. And Charles Darwin, the man who is supposed to be the ship's naturalist, discovers his first great weakness. He doesn't just get seasick, he gets violently ill. For the first few weeks, Darwin is effectively paralyzed. While the sailors are scrambling up the rigging, fighting the wind and rain, Darwin is lying in his hammock, unable to move, vomiting into a bucket until his stomach is empty, and then vomiting bile. He is helpless, he is miserable, and worst of all, he is a joke. You have to remember, the British Navy is a brutal, hyper-masculine environment. The sailors are tough, scarred men who have lived at sea since they were children. They look at this rich, tall, soft college boy, green in the face, groaning in his hammock, and they laugh. They call him the flycatcher. To them, he is dead weight. He is just another mouth to feed who can't even stand up. Darwin begins to spiral. He lies in the dark, listening to the wood creak, smelling the stench of bilge water and unwashed bodies, and he thinks he has made a fatal mistake. He writes in his diary about the misery, the regret. He thinks about the comfortable parsonage he left behind. He thinks about the solid ground of England. He genuinely believes he might die of exhaustion before they even reach the equator. The physical toll is destroying him. But it is right here, in the depths of his misery, that something happens. A moment that seems small, but actually changes the world. Captain Fitzroy, seeing his new friend suffering, decides to cheer him up. He walks into the cramping, smelly cabin and hands Darwin a gift. It is a book, the first volume of Principles of Geology by a man named Charles Lyell. Now, you need to understand the irony of this moment. Captain Fitzroy is a devout, literal believer in the Bible. He gives Darwin this book because it contains good maps and facts about rocks. But he explicitly warns Darwin, read the facts, but ignore the theories. Fitzroy knows the book is dangerous, he just doesn't realize how dangerous. Darwin, having nothing else to do while he lies sick in his hammock, opens the book. And as he reads, the walls of the ship seem to fall away. You see, before this book, almost everyone believed the earth was young. They believed the landscape, mountains, valleys, canyons, were shaped by sudden violent catastrophes like Noah's flood. God smashed the earth into shape, and then he stopped. That was the dogma. But Charles Lyell had a different idea, a radical idea. Lyell argued that there were no catastrophes. He said that the earth is shaped by tiny, slow forces, rain, wind, erosion, volcanic uplift, acting over unimaginable amounts of time. He called it uniformitarianism. The idea is simple. A single drop of water wearing away a stone is nothing. But give that drop of water 10 million years and it will carve the Grand Canyon. This is the inciting incident for Darwin's mind. As the Beagle gets tossed around by the Atlantic waves, Darwin's brain is being tossed around by deep time. He starts to look at the world differently. He stops thinking in terms of thousands of years and starts thinking in terms of millions. If the land can change so much over time, simply by the accumulation of small changes, could life do the same? He doesn't say it yet. He doesn't even write it down. But the seed is planted. And it was planted by the very man who would later hate him for it. This sets the stage for the psychological war that will define the voyage. The Beagle isn't just a ship, it is a pressure cooker. On one side you have Captain Fitzroy, the authoritarian, the creationist, the man who believes the Bible is the literal history of the world. On the other side, you have the book he just brought on board, Principles of Geology, which says the Bible is wrong about the age of the earth. And in the middle, you have Charles Darwin. They eat dinner together every night. The captain's table is a tiny space just a few feet across. Imagine the tension. The ship is rolling 30 degrees to the side. The candles are flickering. Fitzroy is talking about the flood, about how God designed the currents and the winds. And Darwin is sitting there trying to hold down his soup, thinking about Lyell's book, thinking about millions of years. He nods politely. He agrees with the captain. He's too young and too sick to argue. But the divide is opening. For now, the ocean is the enemy. The waves in the Bay of Biscay are massive. The little coffin brig is being hammered. There are moments when the ship rolls so far onto its side that the tips of the masts almost touch the water. If they go an inch further, the ship flips and everyone dies. Darwin learns to walk with the sea legs, a wide stance to keep balance. He learns to sleep while being thrown against the wall. He learns that nature is not a peaceful garden created for man's delight. Nature is a violent, chaotic force that wants to kill you. By the time they reach the Canary Islands, Darwin has changed. He is thinner. He is paler. He has realized that this voyage is not a holiday. It is a fight for survival. But he has also realized that the world is much older and much stranger than his father or his professors ever told him. The fail son has survived the first leg of the journey. He has survived the vomiting and the mockery. But as the Beagle turns its bow toward South America, toward the grave of giants, Darwin has no idea that the real horror and the real discovery is waiting for him in the dirt of a continent he has never seen. The coffin ship has survived the Atlantic, but now it is heading into the unknown. Chapter 3. The Grave of Giants, South America. We have survived the vomiting. We have survived the claustrophobia of the floating coffin. And now, finally, after months of being tossed around like a cork in a washing machine, Charles Darwin steps onto solid ground. The Beagle drops anchor off the coast of Argentina at a place called Punta Alta. To the sailors, this place is nothing special. It is just a dusty, desolate stretch of coastline with some scrubby bushes and a lot of dirt. But to Charles Darwin, this dirt is about to become the most important substance on planet Earth. Because he isn't just stepping onto a beach, he is stepping onto a crime scene. You have to understand Darwin's mindset right now. He is still that young theology student. He is walking around with a hammer in one hand and a Bible in the other. He is looking for curiosities, pretty shells, interesting beetles, maybe a new bird to shoot and stuff. He is not looking for a revolution. But while the sailors are busy cleaning the ship and stocking up on water, Darwin starts hacking away at a reddish mudbank near the shore. He sees something white sticking out of the clay. He digs a little deeper, and then he hits something hard. He clears away the dirt, and his heart stops. It isn't a shell, it isn't a rock, it is a bone. But not just any bone. It is a femur the size of a tree trunk. It is a skull huge enough to fit a human head inside its jaws. Darwin calls the crew over. They start digging frantically, pulling massive, heavy fragments out of the cliffside. And as they lay these pieces out on the beach, Darwin realizes he is looking at a monster. This is the moment the detective story begins. Darwin identifies the creature as a megatherium. Imagine a sloth, you know, the cute, slow things that hang in trees. Now imagine a sloth that is the size of an elephant. This thing weighed 4 tons. It had claws the size of butcher knives. It could tear a tree out of the ground like it was a weed. And right next to it, he finds something else. He finds massive hexagonal armor plates. They look like pieces of a giant tank. These belong to a creature called a glyptodont, essentially an armadillo the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. Darwin stands on that beach, wiping the sweat and dust from his forehead, and he feels a cold chill that has nothing to do with the wind. Because he is looking at these bones, and he is looking at the world around him, and he notices something impossible. Look at the ground. Scampering around in the bushes right next to these fossils are modern armadillos. They are tiny, cute, armor-plated animals. Now look at the fossil. It is a giant, extinct, armor-plated animal. Why are they in the exact same place? Why is the land of the armadillos also the grave of the giant armadillos? This seems like a simple question to us today, but in 1832 this is a theological nightmare. Remember, Darwin believes in the perfect creation. He believes God created every species individually, placed them in their perfect environment, and that they stay there forever. But here is proof that species die. These giants are gone, extinct. So Darwin has to ask himself, why? Why would God create a magnificent 4-ton giant sloth, design it perfectly, and then wipe it off the face of the earth? The standard religious answer at the time was Noah's flood. The idea was that these animals were too big or too slow to make it onto the ark, so they drowned. But Darwin looks at the rocks. He looks at the layers of sediment where he found the bones. These weren't washed here by a chaotic flood. These animals died slowly, peacefully, in an estuary over thousands of years. The flood theory doesn't fit the evidence. And then the second scarier question hits him. If God killed these monsters, did he replace them? Did God swoop down and say, "Okay, the giant armadillo didn't work out, let me try a smaller version," and poof, create the modern armadillo? That seems sloppy. That doesn't seem like the work of an all-powerful, perfect engineer. Why would the Creator make a draft version and then a final version? This is the first major clue in the mystery of evolution, though Darwin doesn't call it that yet. He calls it the law of succession. He realizes that the animals of the past look suspiciously like the animals of the present living in the same area. It's like looking at a photo of a grandfather and a grandson. You can see the family resemblance. But if they are related, that means one must have turned into the other. Darwin packs these massive bones into crates. He drags them back to the ship. Imagine the scene. He hauls a literal ton of dusty ancient bones onto Captain Fitzroy's tiny, clean warship. Fitzroy is not happy. The ship is already cramped. Now it smells like old dust and decay. Fitzroy looks at the bones and says, "These must have been animals that didn't make the ark." He dismisses them. To Fitzroy, they are just rocks. But Darwin can't stop thinking about them. He sleeps in his hammock, swinging back and forth, dreaming of monsters. He realizes that the earth is not a static painting. It is a graveyard where giants used to walk. And if those giants disappeared, what about us? What about humans? Are we permanent, or are we just another layer of fossils waiting to be buried? This discovery at Punta Alta is the smoking gun. It proves that the biological world changes over time, but Darwin still lacks the how. He knows the victims, the fossils. He knows the timeline, deep time. But he doesn't know the method. He doesn't know how a giant sloth becomes a small sloth, or why. He has found the body, but he hasn't found the murder weapon. As the Beagle sails south, leaving the grave of giants behind, the temperature starts to drop. The water turns grey and violent. They are heading toward the bottom of the world, Tierra del Fuego. And if Punta Alta was where Darwin questioned the history of animals, Tierra del Fuego is where he will be forced to question the history of man. He thinks he has seen savagery in the bones of the monsters. He is wrong. He is about to meet the most terrifying creature on Earth. And he is going to realize that when you strip away the clothes, the religion, and the manners, that creature is looking right back at him in the mirror. The detective story is over. The horror story is about to begin. Chapter 4. The Savage Mirror, Tierra del Fuego. We have seen the monsters of the past buried in the mud, but now the Beagle is sailing into something far more terrifying. It is sailing into the future of Charles Darwin's soul. The date is December 1832. The ship has reached the very bottom of the map, Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire. If you think you know what wilderness looks like, think again. This isn't a forest. It is a nightmare of jagged black rocks, freezing sleet, and gale-force winds that scream off the Antarctic ice shelf. It is a place where life shouldn't exist. But it does. But before we look at the land, we have to look at the passengers. Because for the last year, I haven't told you the whole truth about who was on board the Beagle. Darwin and Fitzroy weren't the only ones eating at the captain's table. There were 3 others, 3 people who didn't belong. Their names, or at least the names the British gave them, were Jemmy Button, York Minster, and Fuegia Basket. They were indigenous people from this frozen wasteland. 3 years ago, Captain Fitzroy had kidnapped them. He plucked them right off the beach, hauled them onto his ship, and sailed them all the way to London. But this wasn't just a kidnapping. It was an experiment. Fitzroy, with his massive ego and his literal Bible, wanted to prove a point. He wanted to prove that civilization is a gift from God that can be given to anyone, like a coat. He dressed them in 3-piece suits. He taught them to speak English. He taught them to drink tea with their pinkies out and to bow to the Queen. And it worked. By the time they got back on the Beagle, Jemmy Button was a dandy. He wore white gloves. He was polite. He was, by all accounts, a Victorian gentleman. And now Fitzroy is bringing them home. The plan is to drop them off in Tierra del Fuego to start a Christian mission. Fitzroy believes that because Jemmy looks like a gentleman, he will act like a beacon, and suddenly the whole tribe will start wearing trousers and reading the gospel. It is the ultimate test of nature versus nurture. But when the anchor drops in the icy water, the experiment collides with reality, and the crash is violent. Darwin stands at the railing, shivering in his coat. He looks toward the shore, and he sees them, the locals, the wild Fuegians, and he is absolutely horrified. You have to remember, Darwin is a rich kid from the British countryside. He has never seen a human being in a state of nature. He writes in his diary that these people are monsters. They are naked in the freezing snow. Their skin is painted with red and white clay. They are screaming, wild, guttural howling that doesn't sound like language to Darwin's ears. They are foaming at the mouth with rage and excitement. Darwin looks at them, and he feels a visceral disgust. He writes, "I could not have believed how wide was the difference between savage and civilized man. It is greater than between a wild and domesticated animal." He calls them the lords of this miserable land. To Darwin, they look like demons. He cannot believe that he shares a species with them. But then he turns his head. He looks at Jemmy Button, standing next to him. Jemmy is wearing his fancy jacket. He is clean-shaven. He looks embarrassed by his screaming relatives on the shore. And in that split second, the truth hits Darwin like a punch to the gut. Look at the demon on the beach. Now look at the gentleman on the deck. Biologically, they are identical. They have the same brain, the same blood, the same potential. The only difference is that one was taken to London and taught to wear a suit. This is the scary thought. If a savage can become a gentleman in just 3 years, then the reverse must also be true. A gentleman is just a savage in a nice coat. Civilization isn't a permanent, God-given state of being. It is a thin, fragile layer of paint. We are not angels created separate from the animals. We are animals. We are changeable. We are plastic. This realization shakes Darwin to his core. The Bible says man was made in God's image. But Darwin is looking at the Voyagians and realizing that man is made in nature's image. We adapt to our environment. In London, you wear a suit to survive society. In Tierra del Fuego, you cover yourself in grease and scream to warn off enemies. Neither is better. They're just adaptations. The tragedy comes when they finally drop Jemmy Button off. They build him a little house. They give him gardens, plates and cutlery. They leave him there, the English gentleman in the middle of the Stone Age. Fitzroy sails away, proud of his work. He thinks he has planted a seed of God. But when the Beagle returns later, the house is destroyed. The garden is trampled. Jemmy Button is there, but the suit is gone. The white gloves are gone. He is thin, painted, and wild again. The experiment has failed. The tribe didn't become like Jemmy. Jemmy became like the tribe. He had to survive. Fitzroy is heartbroken. He thinks it is a failure of religion. But Darwin sees it as a triumph of nature. Jemmy Button adapted. He shed the useless skin of the gentleman and regrew the skin of the survivor. As the Beagle sails away from the fires of Tierra del Fuego, Darwin is haunted. He looks at his own hands. He looks at his own crew. He realizes that the line between a man and a beast is not a solid wall. It is a blurry, shifting line. And if humans can change this much, if we are just animals reacting to our environment, then we are subject to the same laws as the giant sloth and the armadillo. We are not special. We are just another species trying to survive the cold. The savage mirror has shown Darwin his own reflection, and he will never see himself or humanity the same way again. The Bible told him he was a fallen angel. Tierra del Fuego told him he was a risen ape. Chapter 5. The Cowboy Naturalist, the Pampas. We need to take a break from the ocean. We need to get off that claustrophobic vomiting nightmare of a ship. Because in 1833, Charles Darwin undergoes a transformation that nobody talks about in the textbooks. He stops being the sick theology student, and he starts being an action hero. I know that sounds ridiculous. But for the next few months, Darwin leaves the Beagle behind to explore the interior of Argentina. And he doesn't do it with a butterfly net. He does it with a gun. Welcome to the Pampas. A limitless ocean of grass that stretches from the Atlantic to the Andes. There are no laws here. There are no churches. There is only the horizon, the horses, and the deadliest men in South America, the gauchos. These men are the cowboys of the South, but they make American cowboys look like choir boys. They live entirely on roast beef and cigars. They sleep on the ground. They fight with knives. And Charles Darwin, the polite upper-class British gentleman, looks at them and decides, I want to run with them. He buys a horse, he buys a set of pistols, he grows a beard, and he rides out into the wilderness. This is the glow-up of the century. The man who couldn't handle a surgery room is now drinking malt, a caffeine-rich tea, around a campfire with rough men who kill for a living. He learns to ride for days without stopping. He learns to hunt for his own food. He even tries to learn their weapon of choice, the bolus. 2 heavy stones tied together with a leather cord. You swing it around your head and throw it to wrap around the legs of an ostrich or a guanaco. There is a hilarious moment recorded in his diary where Darwin tries to show off. He swings the bolus, releases it, and instead of hitting the target, he accidentally wraps it around the back legs of his own horse. The horse almost falls over. The gauchos laugh until they cry. They cry out, "For a man of science, he is a terrible hunter." It is a rare moment of comedy, but the laughter is surrounded by darkness, because this isn't just a camping trip. Darwin is riding through a war zone. At this exact moment, the Argentine dictator, General Rosas, is waging a war of extermination against the indigenous people of the Pampas. It is a genocide. Darwin rides past military encampments. He sees soldiers tracking footprints. He talks to General Rosas himself. He is witnessing the brutal reality of survival of the fittest in human society. He carries his loaded pistols not for show, but because if he meets the wrong group of strangers on the horizon, he is a dead man. The pale sun has become tough. His skin is leathery from the sun. His nose, the one Fitzroy hated, is peeling. He is becoming a man of the earth. But even while he is dodging soldiers and drinking with cowboys, the detective in his brain is still working. He is hunting for something specific, a ghost. The gauchos tell him a rumor. They tell him that out here on the plains there is the common rhea, a large flightless bird, basically the South American ostrich. But they say there is another one, a secret one. They call it the Avestrus patis, the little rhea. They say it is smaller, darker, and faster. Darwin is obsessed. He offers a reward to any gaucho who can find him one. He scours the plains. He looks at every bird through his telescope, but he finds nothing. The ghost bird eludes him. He begins to think the gauchos are messing with him. He assumes the patis is just a myth, or maybe a juvenile version of the big one. He rides back to the coast to meet up with the beagle. He is tired, he is hungry, and this leads to the most embarrassing and most important dinner party in the history of science. It is January 1834. The ship is anchored at Port Desire. The artist on board, a man named Conrad Martins, goes out hunting and shoots a rhea. It's a smallish one. They bring it back to the ship. The cook plucks it, roasts it, and serves it up for dinner. Darwin sits down. He tucks a napkin into his collar. He picks up his fork. He takes a bite. It's delicious. He takes another bite. He's chewing the meat, talking to the captain, probably about the weather. And then he freezes. He looks at the bones on his plate. He looks at the bones in the garbage pile. The realization hits him like a lightning bolt. This is it. This isn't a young ostrich. The shape of the bones is different. The feathers are different. He is eating the ghost. Darwin literally spits out his food. He screams, "Stop eating!" He jumps up and starts digging through the chaotic mess of the dinner table. He rescues the head. He rescues the neck. He rescues the wings from the soup pot. He manages to salvage the legs and the feathers. These grease-covered scraps are actually sent back to London, glued back together and named Rhea Darwini. You can still see them in a museum today. But once the panic is over and the laughter dies down, Darwin is left with a puzzling fact. And this fact destroys another piece of his religious worldview. Here is the puzzle. The big rhea lives on the north side of the Rio Negro, a large river. The little rhea lives on the south side of the Rio Negro. The environment on both sides of the river is identical. It's the same grass, the same bugs, the same climate. If God designed every animal to be the perfect match for its environment, why would he make two different ostriches for the exact same job? Why not just put the big rhea on both sides, or the little rhea on both sides? The design theory doesn't make sense here, but evolution does. Darwin starts to think, what if there was originally just one ancestor bird? And what if the river separated them? Over time, the group on the south changed. They drifted apart. They became a new species, not because God invented a new sketch, but because they were isolated. This is the lesson of the Pampas. Geography matters. Barriers matter. Species aren't placed on the map like chess pieces by a divine hand. They flow across the land, changing and splitting as they hit rivers and mountains. The cowboy naturalist wipes the grease off his chin. He packs his pistols away. He has survived the war, he has survived the wild horses, and he has eaten his own discovery. He is tougher now, and he is going to need every ounce of that toughness, because the Beagle is about to turn towards the Pacific, and the Pacific is ready to shake the world apart. Darwin has seen the bones of the past, he has seen the savages of the present, he has seen the species separated by rivers. Now he is about to see the earth itself move. Next stop, Chile, and the day the world ended. Chapter 6. When the World Shook, Chile. We have to talk about trust. There is one thing in this life that you trust more than anything else. You don't trust your government, you don't trust the weather, and you probably don't even trust your own memory. But you trust the ground. You trust that when you put your foot down, the earth will be solid. It is the literal foundation of our reality. We build our houses on it. We build our lives on it. We call it terra firma, solid earth. But on February 20th, 1835, Charles Darwin learned that solid ground is a lie. The Beagle is currently exploring the coast of Chile. It is a beautiful sunny morning. Darwin is on shore, resting in the woods near the town of Valdivia. The air is still. The birds are singing. And then, at exactly 11:30 a.m., the world ends. It doesn't start with a sound. It starts with a feeling. Darwin later wrote that he felt a sudden vertigo, like he was back on the ship. The ground beneath him, which had been solid rock for millions of years, turns into liquid. It ripples. It rolls like water. Darwin is thrown to the ground. He clings to the earth as the trees around him whip back and forth until their roots snap. This isn't a tremor. This is a megathrust earthquake. Modern seismologists estimate this was a magnitude 8.5 event. To put that in perspective, that is thousands of times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It is enough energy to crack the planet open. And for 2 terrifying minutes, Charles Darwin isn't a scientist. He is a tiny, fragile animal holding on for dear life while the continent of South America screams. When the shaking finally stops, the silence is worse than the noise. But the disaster isn't over. Darwin rushes toward the coast, and he witnesses an apocalypse. The city of Concepcion, just up the coast, has been deleted. I don't mean damaged, I mean erased. The cathedral walls have crumbled into dust. 70 villages are destroyed. But the ocean has gone mad. Survivors tell Darwin that the water turned black. It began to boil and bubble with sulphurous gas released from the bottom of the sea. And then it pulled back. It retreated for miles, sucking the harbour dry, leaving ships stranded in the mud. And then it came back. A massive tsunami wall of water smashed into the coast, carrying schooners and houses inland, grinding the city into splinters. It is a scene of absolute horror. Dead bodies, ruined homes. The smell of death and sulphur is everywhere. Most people are weeping. Most people are praying to God, asking why he is punishing them. But Charles Darwin does something that separates him from every other person on that beach. He doesn't just mourn, he measures. He ignores the ruined cathedral, he ignores the politics, he runs straight toward the wet, jagged rocks on the shoreline. And there, amidst the destruction, he finds the clue that unlocks the history of the earth. He looks at the rocks that used to be underwater. They are covered in beds of mussels, sea creatures that attach themselves to the stone. But these mussels aren't underwater anymore. They're rotting in the hot sun. They are 10 feet above the high tide mark. Do you understand what that means? The ocean didn't go down. The land went up. In a single instant, this massive earthquake pushed the entire continent of South America upwards by 10 feet. Darwin walks along the beach, measuring the lift. It is undeniable. The land is not a static stage. It is an elevator. And then Darwin looks up. He looks past the ruined city, past the forests, to the towering peaks of the Andes Mountains in the distance. They are 10,000 feet high. They are capped with snow. They look eternal. But Darwin remembers something he saw on his previous expeditions. When he climbed those mountains, he found something weird at the very top. He found fossilized shells. He found the remains of sea creatures miles above the ocean. For years, scientists and priests had tried to explain this. They said, "Oh, the biblical flood must have washed the shells up there." But Darwin stands on the broken coast of Chile, smelling the rotting mussels, and he realizes the flood theory is garbage. He does the math. One earthquake pushed the land up 10 feet. If you have one earthquake every 100 years, and you wait for 1,000,000 years, you don't need a flood. The land itself rises from the sea. The Andes Mountains weren't built by a magic trick. They were built exactly like this, inch by inch, disaster by disaster, over oceans of time. This confirms the theory of Charles Lyell, the man who wrote the book Darwin read on the ship. The Earth is ancient, and it is constantly moving. But then Darwin takes the thought one step further. And this is the dangerous part. This is the thought that leads to evolution. He looks at the destruction around him. He realizes that the environment changes violently. The coastline changes. The climate changes. The islands rise and fall. If the stage keeps changing, the actors have to change too. Think about it. If you are an animal perfectly designed for the coastline, and suddenly the coastline is lifted 10 feet into the air and becomes a dry cliff, you have two choices. You adapt or you die. The rotting mussels on the rocks didn't adapt. They died. But what about the ones that survived? The earthquake in Chile proves that the world is not a finished painting. It is a conveyor belt. It is a grinder. It creates new environments and destroys old ones without mercy. And if the Earth is in a constant state of flux, then life cannot be fixed. Life must be fluid. Life must be able to move and change and shift, just like the rocks beneath Darwin's feet. The city of Conception lies in ruins. The British Navy helps the survivors. The Beagle prepares to sail on. But the young man standing on the deck is different now. He has felt the power of the planet. He knows that nothing is permanent, not the mountains, not the oceans, and certainly not the species that live on them. Darwin has the time, millions of years. He has the mechanism of Earth, geological uplift. He has the pieces of the puzzle, but he is still missing the final key. He needs to see how life changes. He needs to see the laboratory where nature runs its experiments. And as the Beagle sails north, leaving the destruction of Chile behind, it is heading toward a cluster of ugly volcanic islands on the equator. A place where the animals don't run away. A place that looks like hell, but holds the secret of life. He is heading to the Galápagos. Chapter 7. The Land of Ugly Things, Galápagos. We have arrived at the moment you have been waiting for, the Galápagos Islands. This is the part of the movie where the music swells, the clouds part, and Charles Darwin stands on a pristine beach, looks at a bird and shouts, "Eureka!" He writes down the theory of evolution, high-fives a turtle, and changes the world. Right? Wrong. If you think that is what happened, you have been lied to. The truth is much grittier, much funnier, and honestly, much more embarrassing. The reality is that when the HMS Beagle arrived in the Galápagos in September 1835, Charles Darwin didn't feel inspired. He felt miserable. He hated it. He looked at these jagged black volcanic rocks baking in the equator sun, and he didn't call it the cradle of life. He called it hell. He wrote in his diary that the islands looked like the industrial wastelands of England, just smokestacks and slag heaps. It was a cyclopean landscape. It was hot, it was dry, It smelled like sulfur and guano. And the animals? He didn't think they were majestic. He thought they were hideous. This is the land of ugly things. Darwin encounters the marine iguanas, these black spiky lizards that swim in the ocean, and he calls them imps of darkness. He describes them as stupid and sluggish. He grabs one by the tail and throws it into the water just to see if it will swim back. It does. He throws it again. It swims back again. He spends his afternoon bullying a lizard. This is not the behavior of a sage philosopher. This is a bored, sweaty 26-year-old who is sick of being on a boat. And then there are the tortoises, the famous giant tortoises, the symbol of the islands. Surely Darwin treated them with reverence? Absolutely not. He treated them like furniture. He and the sailors would climb onto their backs and try to ride them like horses. Darwin laughs as he tries to balance on a 500-pound shell while the tortoise slowly lumbers through the cactus. But the comedy turns gross very quickly. Water is scarce on these islands. The sun is unrelenting. Darwin gets thirsty. He realizes that these tortoises have a special bladder where they store extra water. So the great naturalist doesn't just study them, he drinks from them. He describes the water as bitter, slimy, and tasting like urine. But he drinks it anyway. This is the unvarnished truth of the voyage. The man who rewrote biology spent his time in the Galápagos surfing on turtles and drinking bladder juice in the blistering heat. But here is where the story turns from a comedy into a thriller. Because amidst the heat and the riding, Darwin makes a mistake. A massive, catastrophic scientific blunder that almost ruined everything. He starts shooting birds. He shoots the famous Darwin's finches. But here is the problem. He doesn't realize they are all finches. He looks at one and thinks, that's a wren. He looks at another with a big beak and thinks, that's a grosbeak. He looks at another and thinks, that's a blackbird. To him, they look like completely different families of birds. So he pulls out his collection bag, and this is the part that makes modern biologists scream. He throws them all in the same bag. He does not label them by island. He shoots a bird on Chatham Island and throws it in with a bird from Charles Island. He mixes everything up. Why? Because he assumes the islands are all the same. They are close together. They have the same climate. He assumes the birds must be the same too. He's blind to the subtle differences. If he had gone home with just that bag, the theory of evolution might never have happened. He was destroying his own evidence. But there was one clue that he got right. A safety net that saved him from his own incompetence. The mockingbirds. Unlike the finches, the mockingbirds were big enough and loud enough for Darwin to notice. He shoots a mockingbird on one island. Then he sails to the next island and shoots another. He holds them up side by side, and he notices something weird. They are different. The chest pattern is slightly different. The beak is a slightly different size. This bothers him. He writes a note. The inhabitants of these islands are not the same. He actually labels the mockingbirds correctly. He puts them in separate bags. This is the smoking gun, but he doesn't realize the gun is loaded yet. And then comes the moment that should have been the epiphany. The moment that proves how blind we can be when we aren't ready to see the truth. Darwin is sitting with the vice-governor of the islands, an Englishman named Nicholas Lawson. They are probably sweating, drinking warm wine, swatting away flies. And Lawson says something casual. He points to the tortoises and says, "You know, I can tell which island a tortoise comes from just by looking at its shell." He explains that on the wet islands, the shell is round and domed. On the dry islands, the shell turns up at the front like a saddle, so the tortoise can reach its long neck up to eat cactus. Stop. Read that again. The vice-governor is literally telling Darwin the answer. He is telling him, the animals change their shape to match their island. It is adaptation. It is evolution. It is right there, staring him in the face, 500 pounds of proof walking around the camp. And what does Darwin do? He ignores it. He thinks that's interesting, and he moves on. He doesn't collect the shells. He eats the tortoises, throws the shells in the trash, and sails away. He literally eats the evidence. This is the missed opportunity. Darwin leaves the Galápagos in October 1835 without a theory. He is happy to leave. He is tired of the volcanic dust. He is tired of the iguanas. He thinks the voyage is winding down. He has a crate full of mixed-up finches, a few carefully labelled mockingbirds, and the memory of a conversation he didn't understand. He doesn't know it yet, but he is carrying a time bomb in his luggage. When he steps back onto the Beagle, the pieces are all there. He has the fossils of the giants, time. He has the earthquake, change. He has the mockingbirds, variation. But they haven't clicked together yet. He needs one more push. He needs to get home. He needs an expert to look at his messy bag of birds and tell him that he is an idiot and a genius. The Galápagos wasn't the end of the mystery. It was the crime scene where he collected the clues without knowing what they meant. The eureka moment isn't happening on a beach. It is going to happen in a damp, grey office in London when he finally realises that the imps of darkness and the ugly things were actually his cousins. The Beagle lifts anchor. They head west across the vast empty Pacific. Darwin looks back at the islands one last time. He sees a hellscape. We see the laboratory of God. The tragedy and the glory is that he had to leave it to understand it. The voyage is almost over, but the nightmare of the dangerous secret is just beginning. Chapter 8. The Coral Theory, Pacific Ocean. We are now 4 years into this voyage. The Beagle has survived the storms of Cape Horn, the earthquakes of Chile, and the ovens of the Galápagos. Now they are lost in the blue oblivion of the Pacific Ocean. It is a desert of water. For weeks there is nothing but the horizon. But then a speck appears, a miracle in the middle of the abyss. It is an atoll, a perfect ring of white sand and green palm trees floating on top of the deep, dark ocean. Inside the ring, the water is a calm, turquoise lagoon. Outside the ring, the ocean is a violent, crashing monster. To the sailors, this place is a paradise. It is a place to get drunk, eat coconuts, and sleep on the beach. But to Charles Darwin, this beautiful island is a nightmare. It is a paradox. It is a physical impossibility, that keeps him awake at night. Because, according to everything science knew in 1836, this island should not exist. Here is the mystery that was driving Darwin crazy. We know that coral is a living thing. It is a tiny animal that builds a stone house. But coral is extremely picky. It is the Goldilocks of the ocean. It cannot live in the cold, dark depths. It needs sunlight. It needs to be within 100 feet of the surface. If it goes deeper, it dies. So, look at the map. The Pacific Ocean is miles deep. It is an abyss. There is no rock within 100 feet of the surface. So how on earth did the coral get there? How do you build a city of stone in the middle of a bottomless pit? The smartest men in Europe, including Darwin's hero Charles Lyell, had a theory. They said, "Oh, it's simple. The coral is growing on the rim of an underwater volcano crater." They thought the volcano rose up, stopped just below the surface, and the coral grew in a circle around the edge. It sounds plausible. But Darwin, the man who has spent 4 years learning to really see the world, looks at the map and says, "Rubbish. Think about the odds. You would need thousands of volcanoes to stop rising at exactly the same height, just 100 feet below the water. Not a foot higher, not a foot lower. If the volcano breaks the surface, no coral. If it stops too deep, no coral." The odds of that happening thousands of times across the Pacific are 0. Nature is not that neat. So, while the ship sails toward the Cocos-Keeling Islands, Darwin closes his eyes. He stops looking at the water and he starts looking at the movie in his mind. This is the moment Charles Darwin transforms. He is no longer just a collector picking up beetles. He is a theoretician. He starts using the greatest tool of science, imagination. He thinks back to Chile. Remember the earthquake? Remember the mussels lifted 10 feet into the air? He saw the earth pushing up. He realized the Andes mountains were rising. But if the crust of the earth is a balance, if one part goes up, another part must go down. Darwin looks at the vast Pacific Ocean and he realizes the ocean floor is sinking. And suddenly the solution to the mystery clicks into place. It is so simple and so beautiful, it creates a chill down his spine. Here is the theory. Millions of years ago, a volcano erupted from the bottom of the sea. It broke the surface and created a volcanic island, a high, rocky mountain in the ocean. Coral larvae swam by and started building a skirt around the edge of the island, right at the waterline. But then, over eons, the ocean floor began to sink. The heavy volcano started to slide back down into the abyss. Now, here is the race. As the land sinks, the coral is in danger of drowning in the dark, so it builds up. It builds a new layer of skeletons on top of the old ones, desperately trying to stay near the sun. The volcano sinks inch by inch. The coral grows inch by inch. Eventually, the volcano disappears completely under the water. It is gone, buried in its watery grave. But the coral has kept pace. The ring of coral is still there, marking the spot where the shoreline used to be. The atoll isn't a magic island. It is a tombstone. It is a monument to a drowned mountain. This is a brilliant idea. But in 1836, an idea is nothing without proof. Darwin needs to check. On April 1st, the Beagle arrives at the Cocos Keeling Islands. The water is crystal clear, the coconuts are falling. But Darwin doesn't relax. He grabs a massive heavy iron pole, a sounding lead, and he heads for the outer edge of the reef. This is not a safe place. This is where the entire force of the Pacific Ocean smashes into the wall of coral. The surf is deafening. The waves are like collapsing buildings. Darwin walks out onto the jagged rocks. He is slipping. The spray is blinding him. If he falls in here, he will be shredded against the razor-sharp coral. But he has to know. He drops the sounding lead over the edge of the reef into the dark blue water. He measures the depth. 10 fathoms, 20 fathoms, 50 fathoms. The line keeps going down. The wall of the reef drops off almost vertically. It is a cliff. Darwin pulls the line up and looks at the tallow, grease, on the bottom of the weight. It is clean. There is no sand. There is no volcanic rock. It is just dead coral going down and down and down. He swims out into the lagoon. He creates a map of the structure. Everything fits. The shape of the reef perfectly matches the profile of a sinking mountain. He stands there, wet, salty and exhausted, and he realizes he has done something incredible. He has looked at a rock and seen time. He has looked at a static ring of coral and seen a slow-motion movie of a mountain dying over 1 million years. He writes to his sister. The subject of coral formations has for some time been a favorite point with me. That is the understatement of the century. This is the moment Darwin proves he is smarter than his teachers. When he eventually returns to London and presents this theory, the old guard, including Charles Lyell, are stunned. They have to admit he is right. And by the way, modern drilling in the 1950s proved Darwin was 100% correct. They drilled down through an atoll and hit volcanic rock 1 mile deep. Why does this matter? Why is this chapter in the video? Because this is the training montage for his brain. If Darwin can look at an atoll and see the invisible forces of geology working over millions of years, then he is ready for the final step. He is ready to look at a bird, or a beetle, or a human being, and see the invisible forces of biology working over millions of years. He has mastered the earth. Now he is ready to master life. The Beagle sets sail again. They are done with the Pacific. The adventure is winding down. Darwin is homesick. He hates the sea. He misses his family. But he isn't the same fail son who left England 5 years ago. He is a man who carries the weight of a new world in his notebooks. The voyage is ending. But the long, lonely, dangerous journey of the mind is just beginning. He is going home, and he is bringing a dangerous truth with him. Chapter 9. The long way home. The adrenaline is gone. The thrill of the hunt is gone. The wonder of the Galápagos is fading into the distance. And now Charles Darwin is left with the one thing he hates more than anything else in the world, the ocean. We are now in the year 1836. The HMS Beagle has been gone for nearly 5 years. Do you understand how long 5 years is? When they left, Darwin was a fresh-faced boy who wanted to be a priest. Now he is a bearded, weather-beaten man who has seen cities destroyed, ridden with cowboys, and eaten unknown species. But right now, he doesn't feel like a hero. He feels like a prisoner. The voyage home is the darkest psychological point of the entire journey. They sail to Australia, but Darwin is too tired to enjoy it. He hates it. He calls it a land of greed. They sail to South Africa, but he is too homesick to care. He writes in his diary with a desperation that breaks your heart. He says, "I loathe, I abhor the sea." The novelty has worn off. The seasickness has returned with a vengeance. Every wave is a punishment. All he wants, all he dreams about, is the smell of English rain, the walls of his father's house, and the solid, unmoving ground. He is depressed. He is exhausted. He is done. But while his body is trapped in that swinging hammock, his mind is doing something incredible. This is the part of the story where the detective finally sits down in the smoke-filled room and starts connecting the red strings on the investigation board. Because there is nothing else to do on the long, boring crossing of the Indian Ocean, Darwin starts to organize. He pulls out his notebooks. He pulls out the thousands of pages of scribbled observations he has made over the last 1,700 days. He piles them up on the tiny chart table, and he starts to look for a pattern. For the last 4 years, he has been collecting facts. A bone here, a bird there, a rock there. They seemed like separate, random puzzle pieces. But now, as he reads back through his own handwriting, the pieces start to snap together, and the picture they form is terrifying. He looks at his notes from Chapter 3, The Grave of Giants. He remembers the megatherium, the giant sloth. Fact, the fossils of the past look exactly like the animals of the present in the same location. Conclusion: there is a family resemblance. The dead giants are the ancestors of the living dwarves. They are connected by blood. He flips the page to Chapter 5, The Cowboy Naturalist. He remembers the rhea, the ostrich. Fact, the big rhea lives on the north bank. The little rhea lives on the south bank. Conclusion: they didn't just appear there. They are neighbors. They probably started as one family, but the river separated them and they drifted apart. They changed to fit their side of the river. He flips the page to Chapter 7, The Land of Ugly Things. He remembers the mockingbirds. Fact, every island has a different version of the same bird. Conclusion: God didn't make a special bird for every distinct rock in the ocean. That is inefficient. That is absurd. No. One single storm blew a flock of birds to the islands, and then isolation changed them. And then the brainwave hits him. It is the most dangerous thought a human being has ever had. The Bible says that species are fixed. It says God created the cat and the dog and the cow and the human, and they have remained exactly the same since the Garden of Eden. But Darwin looks at his notes and he realizes that is a lie. Species are not fixed. They are fluid. The giant sloth became the little sloth. The one ostrich became 2 ostriches. The one mockingbird became 4 mockingbirds. They are not separate creations, they are family members. They are all cousins, descending from common ancestors, changing slowly over millions of years. He picks up his pen. He is scared. You have to remember, this is 1836. To write this down is not just science, it is heresy. It is a betrayal of his class, his university, and his church. But he can't deny the evidence. In his ornithological notes, he writes a sentence that signals the end of his innocence. He writes that if these suspicions are true, then such facts would undermine the stability of species. Undermine the stability. It sounds so polite, but it is a declaration of war against the established order of the universe. And the tragedy is that the enemy is sitting right across the table from him. Captain Fitzroy, the man who saved Darwin's life, the man who shared his cabin, the man who has been his only true friend for 5 years. While Darwin is writing his notes that will kill God, Fitzroy is writing his own book. They are literally sitting feet away from each other, writing two completely contradictory histories of the world. Fitzroy is writing the narrative of the voyage, and in his book he is doubling down. He is writing about how the seashells in the Andes prove Noah's flood. He is writing about how the Fuegians prove the fall of man. He is using the voyage to prove the Bible is literally true. Darwin is using the exact same voyage to prove the Bible is wrong. The tension in that cabin is suffocating. They argue. They fight over slavery. They fight over geology. They fight over the nature of suffering. They are still friends. They still respect each other. But the intellectual bond is broken. They are two ships passing in the night, heading to two different worlds. Fitzroy is sailing back to the 17th century. Darwin is sailing toward the 20th century. The Beagle crosses the Atlantic. They stop briefly in Brazil to check the chronometers. Darwin takes one last walk in the jungle. He looks at the complexity of the rainforest, the vines, the ants, the jaguars. Before, he saw it as a perfect creation. Now he sees it as a battlefield. He sees a war of nature where only the fittest survive. It is beautiful, yes, but it is a savage beauty. On October 2nd, 1836, the lookout spots the coast of England, Falmouth. The rain is falling. The sky is grey. It is the most beautiful thing Darwin has ever seen. The anchor drops. The voyage is over. Darwin packs his bags. He packs the messy bag of finches. He packs the jar with the baby ostrich bones. He packs the notebooks that contain the secret of life. He shakes Captain Fitzroy's hand. They say goodbye. They don't know it yet, but they will never be this close again. Fitzroy will eventually realize what Darwin has done. He will feel betrayed. He will feel like he unwittingly transported the Antichrist around the world. He will eventually stand in front of a crowd, holding a Bible above his head, screaming at them to trust the book and ignore Mr. Darwin. And tragically, years later, Fitzroy will lose his battle with the Blue Devils and take his own life. The very fate he brought Darwin on board to prevent. But that is in the future. Right now, Charles Darwin steps off the ship. The ground is steady. He is dizzy. He takes a carriage straight to his father's house. He arrives late at night. The family is sleeping. He walks into the garden he hasn't seen in 5 years. The next morning, his father walks down the stairs. He sees his son, the fail son, the rat catcher. But he doesn't see a boy anymore. He sees a man with a heavy brow and eyes that have seen too much. His father says, "Why, the shape of his head is quite altered." He is right. The shape of his head is altered, and the contents of his head are about to alter the entire human race. Darwin is home, but he is carrying a bomb, and he is going to spend the next 20 years trying to decide if he should light the fuse. Chapter 10. The Dangerous Secret. The ship is empty. The cannons are silent. The storms of Cape Horn are just a memory. It is 1837, and Charles Darwin is walking through the wet, foggy streets of London. He is safe. He is back in the heart of civilization. He sits by a warm fire, drinking tea from a china cup, surrounded by polite society. But do not let the calm atmosphere fool you. Inside Charles Darwin's head, there is a screaming match going on. Because while the physical journey is over, the young man has returned with a piece of luggage that he didn't declare at customs. He has returned with an idea that is so dangerous, so toxic, and so revolutionary that he later described writing it down as confessing to a murder. When Darwin first walked into his father's house after 5 years at sea, his father, the massive, imposing Dr. Darwin, looked at him and said, "Why, the shape of his head is quite altered." He meant it as a joke about phrenology, but it was the truest thing anyone had ever said. The boy who left England believing in every word of the Bible was gone. The man who returned was seeing a world without a master plan. But he still had one problem. He had the theory, but he didn't have the proof. He had a hunch that species changed, but he needed a smoking gun. And the smoking gun was sitting in a dusty bag right there in his office. Remember the Galápagos? Remember the land of ugly things? Remember how Darwin carelessly shot a bunch of birds, threw them all in one bag, and didn't even bother to label them correctly because he thought they were all different types of birds? He thought he had found wrens, blackbirds, and grosbeaks. He thought it was a mess. Well, in March 1837, Darwin takes this messy collection to a man named John Gould. Gould is the greatest ornithologist in England. He is the expert. Darwin dumps the pile of dead birds on Gould's desk and asks him to identify them. He expects Gould to say, "These are just random birds." A few days later, Gould comes back, and he drops a bombshell. He looks at Darwin and says, "Mr. Darwin, you are mistaken. These are not wrens. They are not blackbirds. They are not grosbeaks." Darwin asks, "Then what are they?" Gould replies, "They are finches, all of them. They are all the same family of bird, but they have developed different beaks to do different jobs." Click. That is the sound of the final piece of the puzzle locking into place. Suddenly, Darwin sees it. He realizes that millions of years ago, a single flock of finches got blown off course from South America. They landed on the Galápagos. Some landed on islands with hard nuts, so they developed thick, crushing beaks. Some landed on islands with cactus flowers, so they developed long, probing beaks. Some landed on islands with insects, so they developed thin, needle-like beaks. They didn't start as different species. They became different species to survive. Nature didn't design them. Nature sculpted them. The sculptor was death, and the chisel was starvation. Only the ones with the right beak survived to have babies. This is the moment the Fail son becomes the most important scientist in history. He rushes home. He opens a fresh notebook, the famous red notebook. He dips his pen in ink. And on page 21 he draws a simple jagged diagram. It looks like a stick figure of a tree. At the bottom he writes a single number. 1. The ancestor. Then the lines branch out, splitting and dividing, growing into different twigs. Above the drawing, he writes 2 words that will change the world forever. I think. This is the tree of life. It seems harmless, but look closer. If this drawing is true, then the Bible is wrong. If this drawing is true, then humans were not created in the Garden of Eden. We are just another twig on the branch, right next to the monkeys and the apes. If this drawing is true, there is no high and low in nature. There is just survival, and this is where the horror sets in. Darwin looks at his notebook and he feels sick. You have to understand the world he lived in. In 1837, this idea isn't just a scientific theory. It is atheism. It is anarchy. If he publishes this, he will be destroyed. He will lose his reputation as a gentleman. He will be kicked out of the scientific societies. His friends, including Captain Fitzroy, who is currently travelling the country preaching the gospel, will hate him. But worst of all, it will destroy his family. Darwin is planning to marry his cousin, Emma Wedgwood. She is a beautiful, intelligent, and deeply religious woman. She believes in heaven. She believes in the soul. If Darwin tells the world that humanity is just a glorified monkey, he is telling Emma that her faith is a lie. He is telling her that when they die, they won't meet in heaven, because there is no special place for humans. He knows this idea will break her heart. He knows she will worry that he's going to hell. So Charles Darwin makes a decision that defines the rest of his life. He closes the red notebook. He takes the greatest discovery in the history of science, and he locks it in a drawer. He decides to live a double life. By day, he writes books about worms and barnacles. He acts like the respectable country gentleman. He goes to church. He raises his children. But by night, he works on his secret. He gathers more data. He breeds pigeons. He writes letters to farmers. He builds a mountain of evidence so high that no one will be able to knock it down. He waits. He waits while his hair turns grey. He waits while his children grow up. He waits while his health fails him, destroyed by the lingering sickness from the voyage and the crushing stress of his secret. He keeps the truth hidden for 20 years. Think about that. For 2 decades he walked around with the answer to "Where did we come from?" in his pocket, and he was too terrified to say it out loud. It ends with a quiet scene in his study at Down House. He is an old man now. The beard is long and white, the image we all know. He looks at his manuscript. He knows he can't wait any longer. A young rival named Alfred Russel Wallace is closing in on the same truth. Darwin looks at the pile of paper. It is titled, "On the Origin of Species." He knows that the moment he sends this to the printer, his quiet life is over. The hate mail will come, the church will attack him, the cartoons will mock him as an ape, but he also knows he owes it to that 22-year-old boy on the sinking ship. He owes it to the giant bones in Argentina. He owes it to the savages in Tierra del Fuego. He owes it to the ugly lizards and the finches. He picks up the manuscript. He hands it to the postman. The 5-year voyage of the Beagle is finally truly complete. The young theology student went out into the world looking for God's creation, and he found something even more majestic. He found a world that creates itself. The voyage was over, but the war for the truth had just begun.